We are. Wait, hold on a second. Before we get going here, we need some tunes. You know the one, right? You know the song here.
I'm going to be honest with you. I can barely hear the music.
You can barely hear it?
I can barely hear the music, man.
Oh, my God. Are we starting off the show with an audio issue here?
I can hear you.
We are back in the saddle. I'm Chris Breiler. That's Trent Knoop. This is the Winged Helmet Podcast. Dude, this feels weird. Yeah, MMB says the audio sucks. That means we're back. That means we're back. Look at Matt Kirby.
Disaster.
It wouldn't be our show if it wasn't a complete disaster right out of the gate. Dude, this feels weird. It feels a little bit odd. We have not been on a live show in almost 4 months. The last time we hopped on was right after Michigan kicked the shit out of Ohio State for the 4th consecutive time down in Columbus. Trent and I hopped on. We talked about that game. And then when we exited the show, we obviously had no idea that it was going to be almost 4 months before we got back on the live. So Trent, I mean, how are you feeling? Does it feel good to be back? Are you nervous? Are you freaked out over there?
Dude, look at this, man. I just can't do it. No, dude, I've been, like I told you last night, Chris and I hopped on here for like a half hour talking, making sure their audio didn't suck and all that stuff.
Which
but
obviously worked.
But no, I mean, I'm excited. I've been ready to do it for a few weeks now. So it feels good to be back.
Yeah, it definitely feels good to be back. I mean, Trent and I talked about this. So full disclosure, again, I'm not going to go into detail, but over the last, I don't know, several months have been dealing with some health things that I just needed to take care of and get right. And so, doing a live show on top of all the other stuff that I was doing just wasn't doable. I mean, I'm talking blood work and doctor's visits and a couple emergency room visits in December. And, not fully in the clear quite yet, but I feel like things are trending in the right direction and at least good enough to the point where I feel like Trent and I need to get back to business. Yes, Trent still does not have a JJ McCarthy jersey on the wall. Nothing has changed. But yeah, man, it felt like time to get back on and do the live show and get back with the community. It's certainly one of the things that we enjoy about this job in particular. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take some fan questions today. I feel like it's going to be a loaded show, but we want to start off with basketball, and then we're going to transition into football. We got a lot to talk about football. We didn't talk about, we didn't reflect on the season. We didn't talk about Bama. We didn't talk about any of that. And so we'll get to the football portion, the latter part of the show. But Trent, we got to start off with basketball. The Michigan Wolverines, number 5 seed. Tournament time is here. They're taking on number 12, UC San Diego. Are you torn in this match, by the way? UC San Diego and Michigan. Do you feel any sort of conflict here?
I mean, I'm a huge UC San Diego fan, so I don't know what I'm thinking right now.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, there seems to be a lot of people out there who think UC San Diego is the favorite here, thinking that they're going to knock off the Michigan Wolverines. And of course, that game is on Thursday, TBS, 10 p.m. So make sure you brew a pot of coffee. Trent's not even sure he can stay awake that late. He spends a lot of time during the day bowling. He exerts a lot of energy. And then by like 8 or 9 o'clock, this guy's shutting it down. He's no good after 9 p.m. So Trent, do you think you can pull it off? Do you think you can stay up and watch?
Dude, I'm the same guy that complains when Michigan football has a 7 o'clock kickoff time. Like we're talking 10 o'clock at night, man. Full disclosure, it's 10 o'clock. I'm usually asleep. So it's going to be rough on me, but I'm going to try to make it work.
Well, that's good to hear because we do kind of have to watch it and pay attention to what's going on. I just want to give a shout out. Good to see you, Matt Kirby, in the comments as always. Scott Ryan, good to see you. CJ Frazier, good to see you. Ricky Collette, I believe I said no, and I didn't say that right. Ricky, it starts with a C. You can correct me in the comments. Larry, good to see you. Mika, good to see you. Tyler, good to see you. MMB in the chat, and then Tyrone, good to see you as well. Let's talk about the basketball team. I know that the tournament game, it kicks off tomorrow. But Trent, you and I haven't really talked about the basketball team again, haven't gone live since November. So we've got a full season of data now in front of us. We know what Michigan did in the Big Ten tournament championship. What are your overall thoughts about this team from the previous season and compared to what it looks like now under the first year of Dusty May? I mean, things looked bad Under the final year, Juwan Howard, one of the worst in the Big Ten. Now with Dusty May, they've risen to one of the top in the Big Ten. They're Big Ten tournament champions. What is your overall assessment from this team watching them?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you want to see a good tournament run here for Michigan, but even if they get upset round one against a very solid team that they're going against, this first season for Dusty May, complete success. We're talking about a team that won 8 games last year. 8 games under Juwan Howard. Michigan returned 3 scholarship players, including Jace Howard, who barely plays. So essentially 2 players returned from last year's team. Dusty May had to go hit the transfer portal, hit the recruiting trail. He brought in, I mean, Danny Wolf. Trey Donaldson was a hero in the Big Ten tournament. Vlad Golden, stout all season long. This whole season, man, it's been success. Ward Manuel did a great job going out and getting Dusty May, giving him the extension early. Like, I mean, again, even if they lose round one, I don't see how Michigan fans can be upset with what Dusty May has done in his first year here.
Really? I'm surprised by that. You don't think a first round exit against UC San Diego would sour a little bit of the positivity currently flowing around that basketball program?
I mean, sure, it's going to probably sour, but I mean, if you take a step back and you look at what he's done in year one, winning the Big Ten tournament, again, we're talking about a team that won 8 games last year. And I mean, they were bottom of the Big Ten, and he's turned around and won the Big Ten tournament. They were in contention to win the regular season. They ended up losing 4 of their last 6 games, but still overall successful season.
Yeah, and I think most fans agree with you. I mean, CJ's, he's saying it in the chat. He says overachieved and exceeded expectations like crazy all season. Anything now is just a bonus. I mean, I think that most people are going to view it that way. Tyrone chiming in, he says, let me pull it up here. He says, our guard play has been on point. That's what matters in the tournament. Listen, I'll agree with you, Tyrone. As of late, the guard play has been pretty good, but I think that during the season, the guard play was a bit of a concern. You weren't getting a lot of high-end production from the guards. And when you kind of take a step back and you look at this basketball team over the course of the entire regular season, there's a lot to like about what they do. I love the big man duo of Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf. I think that that's one of the best in college basketball. And then obviously, I mean, Dusty May, when he came in, he built this team in the transfer portal. When you look at their starters, Vlad Golden, Danny Wolf, Trey Donaldson, you've got Roddy Gale Jr. who's in there. And then even Namari Burnett. I mean, he's a transfer from Texas Tech. He was obviously with the program last year. But this Michigan basketball program right now is built on and succeeding with transfers leading the way. And so I think Dusty May did a hell of a job there. And you're right. I think they exceeded expectations in year one. What I would say, though, is that there were some issues that sort of lingered throughout the whole year. At times, this Michigan basketball team looked like they were damn near unbeatable. The best, I mean, toward the latter part of the season with about 6 games left, Michigan was playing for the regular season conference championship. And then, you lose 4 of the last 6, the wheels sort of come off. And some of the issues that led to that we saw all year, right? And it was like, to me, the most concerning thing is it was fundamental issues, like not boxing out, not rebounding, turning the ball over, giving teams second chance, third chance, fourth chance opportunities. And so it looks like in the Big Ten tournament, Michigan's been able to fix that or at least mitigate that. And so, I mean, dude, against Maryland, what was the rebounding discrepancy? Michigan out rebounded Maryland like 48-20 or something like that. So like, it shows you that they have the capability. What you saw from Trey Donaldson in the Big Ten tournament shows you that he's got that gear. I guess I would deem the season a success. I would also look at a first round exit as a pretty big disappointment. And for me, when I look at the tournament, UC San Diego, and even maybe teams beyond UC San Diego, to me, the biggest concern with Michigan is what I just mentioned. The fundamental issues that we've seen play a factor all season long. Trent, when you look at this team, do you think they've sort of got those things sorted out, or do you think that some of these ugly things we've seen during the season are ultimately going to be the things that prevent them from making a deep run in the tournament?
No, I think if Michigan was ever going to get sorted out, it would have done it halfway through the season. I mean, we still see turnovers. They are the most turnover prone team in the Big Ten. Actually, one of the most turnover prone teams in all of college basketball. And they're going up against a UC San Diego team that forces, I believe it's the 6th most turnovers per game out of any team in college basketball. So Michigan is going to potentially struggle taking care of the ball on Thursday night. And I mean, unfortunately, I think that's what this team is, right? You got to take the good with the bad. They can get hot. They can score in bunches. They can also go on droughts and they can turn the ball over. But Dusty May has them playing with a lot of speed, and that's kind of how he likes playing. Trey Donaldson, Danny Wolf, they both have the ball in their hands a lot, but they can both turn the ball over a lot too. And that is what this team is. You have to take the good with the bad with this Michigan basketball team.
Yeah, and I mean, you can see it in the comments. Mika Johnson saying, "Stop shooting threes. Like, don't even attempt them from this point. Just go into the big guys all game long." And then you've got Matt Kirby saying, "Stop the turnovers." Yeah, I mean, turnovers, rebounding. I didn't say that, in my portion there talking about Michigan, but dude, 3-point shooting at times has been. I mean, you're talking about shooting under 15% for the game. Like that's so. Again, when you look at all these issues. Turnovers, rebounding, poor shooting from the guards, poor shooting outside. Like, I think that those are the types of things that bring your tournament play to an early end in March, and would like to see Michigan continue to ride that wave. They found something in Indianapolis. It seems like they found their groove. They were able to win the tournament championship. Can they carry that into March Madness? Can they eliminate some of those issues? I mean, that's to be determined, but that's going to kick off again tomorrow night, Thursday night against. Before we transition away from basketball, any issues with Michigan being a 5 seed? Because people were pissed.
Absolutely.
On social media. All right, give it to me. Sell me on why it should matter.
Well, I mean, you're talking about a team that had the 3rd most quad 1 wins in all of basketball with 12. Michigan had. They beat Wisconsin both times they played them this year. They beat Purdue twice. Michigan ends up with the 5 seed. Obviously underranked. I also think UC San Diego is probably underranked as well, but that's another talking point. And you give Wisconsin a 3 seed. Michigan, again, beat them twice. You give Purdue a 4 seed. Michigan beat them twice, lost to them one time. To me, I think the seeding was predetermined before the championship game was even played. I don't know how you give Wisconsin a 3, Purdue a 4, and then you give Michigan a 5. I think the committee said, all right, we're giving Michigan a 5 seed no matter what happens. They're going there. We're giving Wisconsin the 3, Purdue 4, whatever. To me, it's terrible.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, especially when you talk about teams like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Purdue and how that seeding played out. And yeah, there's a lot of belief that most of those seedings were already penciled in before Michigan even won the conference championship tournament. But so I guess in that respect, I can see why there would be some frustration. But Trent, when I look at the NCAA tournament, to me, like the difference between being a 5 seed, a 4 seed, a 3 seed, maybe I'm crazy in this. I don't really see it being that big of a factor because unlike the college football playoff, right? We saw it with Penn State. Like Penn State got a favorable seeding. Ohio State had a pretty difficult track to get to the national championship game. Oregon sort of got a bad draw as a team that won the Big Ten. Like your seeding in the college football playoff does seem to have a big impact. But in the NCAA tournament, dude, once you get past like 32 teams, you're in the Sweet 16. Everybody who's playing at that point, they can ball. Everybody who's playing at that point, they got guys that can play ball, and there's no easy path to the NCAA championship. And I think that's what makes the tournament so special. So like when I saw people that were upset about the 5th seed, I'm like, what does it matter? Like whether you're the 5th seed or the 4th seed, you're still going to have a tough go to get to the NCAA championship. Like there is no such thing as an easy path. I mean, am I off base in that, or is there some truth to that?
I'm trying to find a stat real quick to back it up, but I'm almost positive that there's usually 1 or 2 12 seeds that upset a 5 seed every single year in college in March Madness. I don't have a stat to back that up, but I feel that way.
You showed up unprepared. Just tell the folks what happened. You're unprepared. You're supposed to be the stats guy.
I am. I'm failing you on this one.
He's supposed to be knowledgeable, and instead of gathering stats before the show, he was showing me like bowling trophies and certificates that he's won. Do you want to show the fans?
Absolutely.
By the way,
I would love to actually.
For any of the newcomers out there, Trent is He's an aspiring professional bowling coach, something I didn't even know was a
going back
thing.
to 2019, 2020. Can you see that? I was named the state bowling coach of the year in Ohio.
I'm just
I'll wait for my applause here for just a minute, but
this is incredible stuff here. I mean, I didn't even know that was an award that could be won.
dude, we won the state title, man. I coached a state title bowling team, and I was named Ohio's coach of the year in bowling.
Yeah, well, okay, the wheels
And
have.
apparently nobody cares.
But do you know this person here, Trent? Did you lose in
he's-
bowling yesterday?
He's on my Tuesday night bowling team.
Look at that, just outing you. You know, to me, that certificate looks a little bit suspect. It looks to me like something Trent may have created and printed on his own printer, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah, so again, when it comes to the seeding, I saw the outrage. I saw people were pissed off and using the same talking points. Like, well, you know, what about Wisconsin? What about Purdue? To me, like, it doesn't matter. Like, at the end of the day, if you're going to make it to the Elite Eight, if you're going to make it to the Final Four, like, you're going to have to win some games against tough opponents. And I think that, you know, if you're built for March, 5 seed, 4 seed, 3 seed, it doesn't matter at that point. If Michigan's built for March, they'll be able to make their way through it. So again, that game tips off tomorrow on TBS. It's Michigan versus UC San Diego at 10 p.m. Again, I expect most of you to be awake and tuned in. This is Michigan. This is March Madness. You can sleep when March is over, Trent.
Chris, have you really looked at the brackets? Like, what's your prediction for Michigan? Like, let's go ahead and hear it. Like, where do you think Michigan's going to go?
I have no. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they're first round out. And it goes back to all of the things that we talked about before. I don't feel great about the guard play. I liked what I saw in the Big Ten tournament, but I don't feel great about the guard play. I am concerned about the consistent turnovers. I am concerned about, you know, you go cold from 3-point range and you shoot, you know, sub 20% again, that's going to be an issue. The lack of rebounding, I think, is going to be an issue. And if you get up against a team that's got some bigs and got some athleticism like UC San Diego, and they've got an upset mindset, and you don't show up, I mean, I think Michigan could go out pretty early in this tournament, and it's for those reasons. I'd like to see them make a deep run, but I don't see it happening.
I think they get out of the first weekend. I see them winning Thursday. Then I think they beat either Yale or A&M. But then Sweet 16, you get the number 1 seed in all of the entire tournament in Auburn, who I know they struggled to finish the year, but they're very talented, and I'm looking for them to lose in the Sweet 16 to Auburn.
Yeah, I mean, who was it? Vitale has them going to the Elite Eight, playing.
Yeah,
Michigan
he has.
State, right?
Yeah, Dick Vitale has them beating Auburn in the Sweet 16 and then losing to Michigan State in the Elite Eight.
Yeah, another matchup between the Wolverines and the Spartans. How would you feel about that? I mean, if that comes to fruition and Michigan meets Michigan State in the Elite Eight, I mean, you know, these teams now meeting for a third time this year. Do you like Michigan's chances in round 3 in this sort of battle, or is that a nightmare scenario that you don't want to see happen?
I mean, Michigan State's handled Michigan both times this season, right? I think, to me, I don't know how Michigan fans feel about it. I would rather Michigan lose round 1 than lose to Michigan State for a third straight time.
Really? In the Elite Eight?
Yeah. Yeah. I know that's probably, that might be a wild take, but I think losing 3 times in the same year to Michigan State is not a good look.
Well, there's no shame in losing to, look, as much as we hate Michigan State, they got a pretty damn good basketball team, right? I mean,
I don't even think they're that elite. Like,
not elite, but they're pretty damn good, right?
Yeah,
I think
they're good. Yeah.
I think Michigan State, when they're on their game, just like Michigan, I think that these teams can play with anybody in the country. But it's so hard, man, because Michigan is so inconsistent. I'm just about to say I wouldn't necessarily put Michigan on the same level as Michigan State, but it just depends on which Michigan shows up. Are they rebounding? Are they not turning the ball over? Is Vlad Golan and Danny Wolf, I mean, are they maximizing their opportunities? And when Michigan plays that way, sure, I put them on par with Michigan State. I put them on par with anybody in the country, but there's such a stark difference between when they're on and when they're off. And when they're off, they look awful.
They're off.
And when they're on, they look damn near unbeatable. And it's that sort of like ebb and flow and inconsistency that I don't think you can take that into March and have some success. Again, would love to see them go on a magical run. I just don't see it happening.
I think Michigan has the talent to beat anybody in the tournament. Like if they're on, you have Danny Wolf hitting, making plays. You have Trey Donaldson, the Big Ten tournament, Trey Donaldson, Vlad Golden. He's been as steady as it could be the whole season, essentially. Like I think talent-wise, the starting five, they can beat anybody in this tournament. But yeah, if you start turning the ball over 14, 15, 16 times a game, you can lose to anybody as well. So like you said, which Michigan team shows up?
Yeah. And your boy Scott comes through. He says number 5 seeds have a record of 101 and 55 in the tournament. So there you go. One of your good friends, Trent, doing the work for you. Happy to have you in the comment section here, Scott. Tyler Angel says he sees Elite 8 as far as Michigan goes. Wait, who are we trying to kick off the show?
Definitely
Me or
you. It's definitely not me. So
definitely me. Scott Ryan says, "Come on." I'm not sure what this is in reference to, but
I think when I said that you don't want to lose to Michigan State, you rather get bounced out round one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we all know that's bullshit. Nobody wants to see Michigan get bounced in the first round versus losing to Michigan State in the Elite Eight. Would it suck? Yes. Would it be a nightmare on social media and all the trash talk with the rivalry? Absolutely. But if you put together the type of season, the regular season that Dustin May did, then you go into the conference tournament and you win that, and then you make an Elite Eight run, I would say that people would walk away from that, even if it was a loss to Michigan State in the Elite Eight, and say that was a pretty damn good year for Dusty May in year one compared to what things were like last year. So I think that's where we'll leave it with the basketball team. And yeah, Damian, UC San Diego is actually a very good team. I mean, there's a lot of analysts on ESPN, CBS that are picking UC San Diego to actually win that basketball game. So I don't know did you look at what the spread is, what the odds are at this point?
Last I saw, Michigan was only favored by like 4.5.
Yeah. So expected to be a close game. And, once again, it depends on which Michigan team shows up. If Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf are in their bag and playing the way they can, and you're getting strong play from the guards, I think Michigan's odds are pretty damn good. But if they look shaky and they're cold from beyond the arc, and Danny Wolf looks hesitant and they're turning the ball over in the second half down the stretch and giving up multiple second chance points, that's how you're going to get an early exit in the tournament. So we'll have to see once again. Thursday night, 10 p.m., Michigan, UC San Diego. That one's going to be on 10 p.m. And we'll force Trent to stay up and watch it so that we can speak about it knowledgeably the next time we get on. What?
That is a great question, Larry. That is a fantastic question.
Let me think. What day? No, because the 600-pound show, sister. Well, let's clear it up. The 600-pound sister show, that was canceled. They're not doing any more of those. But the 600-pound shows on TLC, I believe those are on Wednesdays. So Thursday, it's tonight. Well, I'll be all in tonight. And then Thursday, I'll be all in.
Unbelievable.
Anybody who doesn't follow the show.
Chris, if there was a new episode on Thursday at 10, what would you do?
I'd have to DVR one. I'm just not sure which one it would be if I had to pick and choose. You get sucked into those TLC shows. I'm telling you. I had you watch one, Trent. We were sending screenshots back and forth.
Yeah. I watched it for probably 20 minutes and I was texting Chris about it. I'm like, man, this is crazy.
Like pouring Pringles on your pizza, stuff like that. I mean, it's incredible television. Anything else we need to say about the basketball team before we transition over to football, Trent?
Now we probably should transition before this is like a 5-hour show talking about what we've missed since we've quit doing these shows for football.
Yeah, let's yeah, it doesn't take long, Matt Kirby. Off the rails. That's when it happens. CJ, what's the question here? When does the podcast start for those shows? Oh, for the 600-pound, the fat people shows. That's not bad. That could be in the works. I should consider that because I know there's people out there like me that are obsessed with those shows. We just got to do the work to find them. Okay, basketball. Let's transition to football. Trent, have not been on since November. Since that time, Michigan goes down to the ReliaQuest Bowl in Tampa. They knock off Alabama. They have a really great stretch on the recruiting trail and in the transfer portal. Sharon Moore's made some moves on the coaching staff. Before we get into all of that stuff, look, man, this football team, I think for most of the season, there was a lot of concern surrounding what the path was like for Sharon Moore leading this football program. it started off okay, a little bit shaky. Then you get into week 2 and you lose that big matchup to Texas. You end up losing to Texas. You lose to Washington. You lose to Indiana. You lose to Illinois. You lose to Oregon. Okay, so the losses to Texas and Oregon aren't necessarily a big deal. But when you're losing to Washington, a team that had to replace a lot as well, and you're losing to Illinois and you're losing to Indiana, fans were in a panic. And for a while, it looked like maybe Michigan wouldn't even qualify for a bowl game, and they certainly changed that in a big way toward the end of the season. So before we get into everything that's happened postseason, Trent, just give me your overall thoughts. Same thing we did with Dusty May. Like, you watched this team perform all year. There were some ups, there were some downs. What's your overall assessment for the Michigan football program after year 1 of the Sherrone Moore era?
Well, I think it's safe to say that we all had probably too high of expectations going into the season. I mean, you and I were talking about Alex Orji and about how he could potentially be in the Heisman running. Like, if everything turned out to be how we thought it might be, how he could throw the football and,
listen, we got to admit, at least I know I was in that camp. I thought that it could be special. Not knocking the guy, but it turned out to not be special. Like, that was a struggle. So yeah, we were certainly off on the quarterback situation. Did not even really have Davis Warren in the mix until, I think it was like
Jack a week. Tuttle or Alex Orji. You and I both kept saying that. It's a 2-man battle. Orji, Tuttle. We both thought Orji would win it because he could run the football and pass it. And obviously they gave him we don't need to go over this again, but they gave him the shot and they didn't trust him to pass the football, and it was just total chaos. But for what Sherrone Moore had to deal with, not having a competent quarterback, you're rotating 3 guys. You end up settling with Davis Warren to finish out the season. The Michigan defense went from being okay at best to being really good again under Wink Martindale. I mean, the way Michigan finished the year, crushing Northwestern, shocking Ohio State, and then I want to say kind of dominating Alabama. I know the final score didn't indicate that, but I felt like they did. I mean, I would say year 1 under Moore was also a success because of how he finished.
Yeah, that finish, I think, completely changed the overall perception of the football program and of Sherrone Moore. I think it just really set this program on a much better path in 2025. And we heard about that, and we'll get into it. But the coordinators this week, Wink Martindale in particular, he admitted that, those last 2 games and what they were able to accomplish, it really changed the mindset in Schembechler about the confidence that they have that they can continue on after winning a national championship in 2023 and play at that level. And I think that when I look at Sherrone Moore's first year as head coach of the Michigan Wolverines and I take everything into account, that's one of the things that really stuck out to me because let's be honest, and we don't want to relitigate the whole beginning of the football season. We don't want to go into, get back down into the mud, but it was not a smooth transition for Sherrone Moore. This was, you're replacing key members of the Michigan football staff. You're replacing key guys off of the roster. You're trying to do all of that on the fly while you're piecemealing your coaching staff and then losing some guys and putting it together. And I think that he did as good of a job as anybody could do in that situation. And then you come out into the season and things don't go the way that you hope they would go. You start losing some games that were considered winnable games against Illinois, against Indiana, even on the road against Washington. I know it's a tough environment, but they had to replace a lot of talent as well. And I think that it would have been very easy for this Michigan team coming off of a national championship season. They're looking at the fact that they might not even become bowl eligible to just go in the tank. Right? The mentality goes in the shitter, the team goes in the shitter, and then things take a completely different turn. And the fact that they rallied, they became bowl eligible with a home win against Northwestern, set up that game in Columbus to go down there and beat Ohio State the way they did, and then to go into the bowl game and beat Alabama the way they did it. And you're right, it wasn't like on paper, it didn't look convincing, but the way Michigan did it, it was Michigan brand football. Yep. True freshman running back Jordan Marshall gets 100 yards in the game, and they're hammering it away. And Frederick Moore
didn't throw the ball like at all in the second half.
Correct. And the rain is pouring down, and it just, to me, the way that season finished spoke more than any of those losses that we saw during the season that might have been head scratchers. Like, how could you go to Illinois and lose that game? Like, those last 2 games of the season, to me, spoke to the fact that Sherrone Moore is the right guy. The mentality is still where it needs to be in Ann Arbor. All those things that made them a championship program are still there. And I think that those final 2 wins for all the younger guys on the squad, like, let's not forget, like, yeah, they had Kenneth Grant and they had Mason Graham for Ohio State, but they didn't have those two guys for Alabama, and they didn't have Will Johnson for a majority of the year. And you look at what's coming back defensively, there's a lot of young guys on that defense that got some opportunity to play. Same on the offensive side. And they're feeling pretty damn confident about what they were able to do down the stretch and carry that into the 2025 season. So overall, man, it's hard to look at, going from a natty to an 8-5 season and say, that was a success. I would venture to say that was a successful year for Sherrone Moore, given everything he had to deal with in the transition, given some of the valleys that they were in during the season, and then how they pulled it out at the end. I think that was a pretty successful year.
And I think it also shows the buy-in of the team for what Sherrone Moore and the coaching staff were preaching throughout the season, that you stay together. You lose Will Johnson for, I think it was like the last half of the year. You're one of your top defensive guys out there. You have injury issues with Colston Loveland. Like you said, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, they don't play in the final game, but Michigan still went out and performed. And I think that the coaching staff found some guys that can compete. Like even Hogan Hansen, right? A young tight end. Yeah. He came out and he showed out when he had to. Jordan Marshall was an absolute stud. Andrew Sprague had a good game against Alabama. Like there's a lot of young guys that Michigan put in the last couple of games that did perform. And I saw CJ's comment that the way they finished might have too high of expectations for this season. But I think the expectations will be high for what Sherrone Moore brought in via the portal and obviously the recruiting cycle that I'm sure we'll touch on. You got the 5-star quarterback. Of course, everybody's going to want to see him and believe that he's going to be the new savior of the program.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, that's, I guess, if you want to be negative, CJ, the last two games could set up too high of expectations. I don't think so. I mean, we'll get into the expectations, what we think are fair expectations for this Michigan football program. And, some of that is going to be based on what happened last year. Some of that's going to be based on, what they're bringing in this year and what they did on the transfer portal, what they did on the recruiting trail, and then what they did from a staffing standpoint. But yeah, man, overall, I think most Michigan fans would consider it a success, and surely that win over Ohio State as a 21-point dog played a huge factor in that. Anytime you can beat Ohio State as the head coach at the University of Michigan, it might not mean anything to those bums down in Columbus anymore, right? The game doesn't matter. It still matters up here, and it's funny that it only stops mattering once you can't get it done. But that's a different topic. Let's talk about, Trent, some of those offseason moves, because. And when I say offseason, look, I know that Bryce Underwood flipped his commitment to Michigan from LSU during the season, but really, none of the things that have happened so far during the offseason made an impact on the 2024 season. So I'm going to count this all as offseason moves. Yep. I think that this was a massive, massive offseason for Sherrone Moore. Again, very, very impressive the way he went about his business. And I think there were some key things that happened. Number one, starting with being able to retain Wink Martindale. For a while there, it looked like Michigan was once again going to be on the hunt for another defensive coordinator. Wink Martindale, he's out interviewing for various NFL jobs. He's a guy with over 20 years experience in the NFL. He came to Michigan from the NFL. For whatever reason, he doesn't end up taking one of those jobs, whether, I'm not going to get in the weeds about whether one was extended or not. Either way you cut it, he's coming back to Michigan. Trent, how big of a deal do you think it is? You get Mike McDonald for a year and then you lose him. You get Jesse Minter for 2 years and then you lose him. How big of a deal is it that Michigan is getting Wink Martindale for year 2 for this defense?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's huge. I mean, retaining coaches is huge, especially after you see success like Michigan, like they had since the second half against Indiana. That's when the Michigan defense really became Michigan defense again. And what's nice about it is I know that they're all 3 different coaches, but you're kind of running the same scheme. Going back to Mike McDonald, Jesse Minter for 2 years. Now you have a Wink Martindale for at least this year, hopefully longer. So you're talking about keeping that culture together, the way they're running things. And it's absolutely huge because if he leaves, you got to go find somebody else. And you don't know what type of defense they're going to run or this and that. So absolutely huge.
What in the hell was that shrieking I heard come through your microphone?
Probably my son upstairs.
Yeah, I mean, it's great for continuity, and I think you're right. let's not forget that a lot of Michigan fans wanted to strap Wink Martindale to a rocket and shoot him off to the moon, mid-season last year. And, he talked about that this week during the press conference. He said, there were some things that we did really well, but he specifically talked about third and distance, third and long, and how they gave up a lot of those situations. And so was not a perfect outing for Martindale in the Michigan defense, but it definitely looked like down the stretch, particularly against Ohio State and Alabama, they were able to figure it out. I mean, when you look at what the defense did against those two teams, Ohio State went on to become the national champion. Alabama, let's not forget that ahead of the college football playoff, there were a lot of people pounding the table that Alabama should have been one of the last teams in the college football playoff. And Michigan went toe-to-toe with both of those teams and came out with a victory. So, credit to Wink Martindale. I think it's huge for this defense. They are familiar with the scheme. And I know that Mike McDonald was running a similar scheme and Jesse Minter was running a similar scheme. They all come from that tree. But at the end of the day, you don't want to have to replace your defensive coordinator every 2 years. You want to find a guy that can stay in that role and the players can be familiar with. So I thought that was a huge move that Sharon Moore was able to get that done. And then I saw it mentioned earlier in the comments, but look, I think everybody thinks and knows, and when you listen to the players, like Kurt Campbell, I think was a great football coach. I don't know that he was the best. Well, I know he wasn't the best fit for offensive coordinator because Michigan decided to make a change there. And I think that Sharon Moore going out and landing Chip Lindsey from North Carolina was one of the biggest moves we've seen during the offseason. You're talking about a guy that's got over 30 years college coaching experience. It was, I think in 2023 with North Carolina, they were averaging almost 500 yards per game. He brings a level of experience that Sharon Moore didn't have at that position. I'll ask you the same question, Trent. When it comes to Chip Lindsey, obviously there's still some surface level knowledge about him. We haven't seen the offense in action, and a lot of people are expecting a hell of a lot more balance. You're talking about an offense that was like 129th out of 133 teams in total yards last year. Want to see more balance, want to see the passing game involved more. How big of a deal was it for Sharon Moore to go out and get Chip Lindsey and bring in a new offensive coordinator?
Yeah, I mean, I had a big board for offensive coordinator, and I don't think Chip Lindsey was even on my radar, to be completely honest with you. But taking a look at what he's done, obviously he coached Drake May at North Carolina, their running back, and Marion Hampton. He also rushed for a ton of yards, over 1,000 yards in back-to-back years. It's definitely balanced. He likes to throw the ball. He likes to run the ball. And during his introduction speech, he noted that Michigan, that's their identity, is running the football, and he's going to stick true to that. But at the same time, he also knows that you got to throw the ball. And Michigan signed Bryce Underwood. They brought in Mikey Keene that we could talk about later. But they didn't put all of their eggs in one basket like I felt like they did this past season. Like if Underwood's not ready, you've got somebody in Mikey Keene who has thrown for nearly 3,000 yards in each of the last 2 seasons. Like the dude can throw the football. I know he played at Fresno State, but he can throw the football. And it's nice knowing that Michigan has at least 2 guys on their roster right now that you could probably get that balanced attack with.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that that's going to be, one of the most interesting things to see with Chip Kelly is I don't think anybody can sit back and argue right now.
I don't know if it's my audio, but I can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Can people out there hear me in the comments? I want to make sure before we keep going here.
Can anybody else hear Chris, or is it just me?
Yeah, maybe you should ask if they can't hear me. Well, Scott says, okay. Yeah, you can't hear me at all? Here we go. Here we go. I don't even know how to navigate these waters if you can't hear me. Maybe you could just sit there and be the pretty face. Is there any audio coming through on your side? Nothing. Wait, can you hear me now?
I can't hear you.
Unplug, plug back in, do whatever you got to do. I'll do the Chip Lindsey stuff. But nobody can really did I say Chip Kelly? Nobody can really accuse Chip Lindsey of not having the weapons that he needs to put together a good offense. God damn it. We're coming off the rails here. The show blows.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, so we're back. Nobody can accuse Chip Lindsey of not having the weapons he needs. I think, one of the downsides for Jesus Christ, who the hell was the coordinator last year?
Kirk Campbell.
Kirk Campbell. One of the downsides for Kirk Campbell.
Dude, I ruined this whole show.
Ruined it. I'm completely sidetracked. One of the downsides for Kirk Campbell is I think it's really hard to run an offense when you don't have an effective quarterback. Oh my God. Thank you, Jacob Morris. Yes, it was Kirk Campbell. I was just talking about him. Trent, they can hear you now. And Mika says we are definitely back because we are a total shit show over here. Long story short, Chip Lindsey has the weapons. You've got Bryce Underwood. You've got veteran Mikey Keene. You've got a backfield that, is it going to be better than what they had last year? Khalil Mullings sort of rose to the top of the depth chart. You had Donovan Edwards there, but I would argue, I like Jordan Marshall. I like Justice Haynes. I like that combination. Are they going to be better than what we had last year? Remains to be seen. I don't think it's going to be any worse. We'll talk about, I saw somebody bring it up in the comments, the wide receivers. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I think they have enough there to make some things happen this year. To me, the offensive line is a bit of a question mark, but overall, I think that this offense is going to make huge strides compared to, it has to, right? You can't finish 129th out of 133 teams. They were down with the service academies. They were down with teams that don't even throw the football. I get that Michigan wants to be run heavy. I guess I get that they want to be smash mouth, but you also have to be able to throw the ball. And I think when you make the type of investment that you make into a guy like Bryce Underwood, the hope is that you're also going to be able to bring in some top tier wide receivers. And I saw somebody mention the Derek Meadows thing. And, I guess maybe we're a little bit surprised that Michigan didn't have more success on the recruiting trail when it comes to wide receivers. But I think that if you are an elite wide receiver, if you're a highly rated wide receiver, you're looking at Michigan as potentially an enticing place. And we know that they're getting visits from elite wide receivers, but I don't think an elite wide receiver like a Jeremiah Smith type wide receiver is going to commit to the University of Michigan until they see what this offense looks like and they can actually see hey, I know that they're going to know how to utilize a talent like me because ultimately my goal is to get to the league. But in any event, I think that the hiring of Chip Lindsey was significant for this Michigan football program in the offseason.
Yeah. So talking about the wide receivers, I think this was probably part of something we're going to talk about, but looking at the roster right now, do you feel like the receiver is probably the weak part of the team at this point in time?
I have that on my list. We're going to get to that in a couple things. I want to finish up the offseason moves for Sharon Moore. You completely threw a wrench into the show by having to pull off your heads. I don't even recognize you without a headset on, without a mic. You got a bowling ball head over there. All right, so we know Wink Martindale, big. Chip Lindsey, big. But what Sharon Moore did on the recruiting trail was also big. Obviously, it starts with Bryce Underwood, 5-star, number 1 quarterback, number 1 overall prospect. This is a guy that looks like a program changer, a franchise QB. Michigan has...
Such a good compliment, man.
Matt Kirby, it's good to have you back here. Michigan hasn't had a quarterback recruit like this, in program history, and this might be the biggest overall recruit in program history. A lot of hype surrounding this guy, but there were other guys that Sharon Moore brought in that are going to make just as big of an impact. You look at a 5-star like Andrew Babaloa on the offensive line. You look at Ty Haywood, another guy who was considered a 5-star, depending on what service you look at. Nate Marshall.
It was ironic that he went down in rank when he committed to Michigan.
Isn't it funny the way that always seems to happen? When guys commit to Michigan, 5 stars become 4 stars for some reason. But, I don't know. How much do rankings and stars matter? Ask Mick Sainer still how much that shit matters. You're talking about guys that was a 3-star recruit coming out of high school, and he's now in the NFL, and he's balling out. So I get that it matters to a certain extent, but overall, I just think it's, services are going to do what they do. But you get Nate Marshall off the edge. You get a guy like Andrew Marsh. We're talking about wide receivers here. Sounds like Andrew Marsh is impressing people early. Whether or not that equates to how many reps he's going to get in the fall, that's to be determined as well. But there's a guy that I think can make an instant impact. And Sharon Moore goes out and signs a borderline top 5 recruiting class nationally, rivals, anything that Jim Harbaugh was able to do during his tenure at the University of Michigan. And I think you could argue with the inclusion of Bryce Underwood. This is the best recruiting class that we've seen come through Michigan in a long time. Trent, were you surprised at what you saw Michigan accomplish on the recruiting trail, particularly after an 8-5 season, after losing Jim Harbaugh, and as much as I don't want to say it, you have this sort of cloud of an NCAA investigation that's hanging out there. You know, if you're Sharon Moore, you've got a lot of things that are sort of working against you compared to what Jim Harbaugh had to deal with. Are you surprised that they were able to get it done?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, obviously NIL, right? Like we have to talk about that. Michigan really executed that tremendously. And
well, since you're on it, let me ask you are you surprised that Michigan is, this was not Jim Harbaugh's deal. He was very resistant to paying guys out on the recruiting trail and coming up with these lucrative NIL packages. The mantra at Michigan for a long time after NIL came out was, once you commit, we will expose you to, different NIL opportunities, but we're not going to pay you to come here. Like, you come here because you want to be a Michigan man, and then we'll help you out with NIL. Are you surprised that, with Sharon Moore leading the way, they've sort of made this drastic turn to where I think Michigan, when you look across the country at teams that are involved in NIL, it's going to be hard to beat the Michigan Wolverines on the recruiting trail if there's a guy that they really, really want.
Yeah. And, I said when Sharon Moore got hired, I thought he would probably recruit a little better than what Jim did, just because every offseason, you didn't know if Jim Harbaugh was going to leave for the NFL or if he was going to be back. And with a guy like Sharon Moore, I feel like as long as he's doing well at Michigan, he's going to be here for a very long time. And then on top of that, he's younger. I think he can relate to the players a little better than what Jim did. That charisma that he has, I think that you could recruit better. But on top of that, and I mentioned this when Michigan was playing poorly, I think it took a season like what Michigan had for them to be like, okay, like we have to open up the checkbook. We have to play the same ball that Ohio State's playing in Georgia and Alabama. Like, we have to go out there and get these kids to come here with NIL money. And that's exactly what happened, right? We saw Bryce Underwood come here, Ty Haywood. I mean, that was a big NIL thing. Nate Marshall, he came back to Michigan, and we all know that NIL had a big factor in that recruitment. So
yeah, I mean, committed to Michigan, then flipped to Auburn, and then committed back to Michigan. So yeah, I agree, man. Like, and I think you make a great point, and it's something that we talked about a lot during the season, that when Michigan was winning the way that they were from 2021 to 2023, like, there was no indication that you needed to change up what you were doing from an NIL standpoint, because you were winning at a high level. You were winning the Big Ten championship every year. You were beating Ohio State every year. You were in the college football playoff every year. And then you went out and won a national championship. And for as much as it sucks, yeah, sometimes it takes an 8-5 season to see how close that is to, like, these other teams are going to play the game, and it's legal now. And you might not like it. You might not want it to be that way. You might hope that there's going to be some sort of reform or change that needs to happen. But at the end of the day, NIL is what it is now. And I think it was Tyrone, who was it? No, it was CJ that said it, and he's spot on. Like it or not, if you don't play the game, you're going to get left behind. And we know how quickly things can change for a program from one year to the next. And so certainly the recruitment of Bryce Underwood, look, was it about more than money? Sure. And Sharon Moore talked about that during an interview recently, where he said, his primary goal, they already had somewhat of a relationship with Bryce Underwood, but he wanted to reestablish that relationship and make Bryce Underwood know that he was a priority. There's no better way to make somebody know they're a priority than to throw $10 to $12 million their way. I mean, that probably sends a pretty strong signal. But the fact that Michigan was able to do that, and the way they were able to do it and dip into that Oracle money and Larry Ellison, and, you're going out to private islands and you're having conversations. Like, when you think about the grand scheme of college athletics, I don't know that there are many programs in the country that can do what Michigan did with Bryce Underwood. And if they can do that once, I'm willing to believe they can do it again if they see a guy that they think is worthy. So at the end of the day, when you look at what Sharon Moore put together from a recruiting class, I think with all the things dealing with 8-5 season, you got the NCAA sort of hanging over the program. And, I don't know if these commitments send a signal that, the players don't seem to be worried about it, and the coaches that are joining don't seem to be worried about it. I know that Buckeye fans and Michigan State fans are worried about it, but the people who are involved with Michigan football in Ann Arbor don't seem to be overly concerned about it. overall, I think Sharon Moore and his staff did one hell of a job on the recruiting trail. And I think that the NIL being such a big factor to me gives me a lot of confidence that we're going to see it continue. I know that the 2026 class is off to a bit of a slow start, but I mean, dude, how excited would you be if Michigan got a 5? I mean, you would like to see a 5-star commitment, but the way recruiting works nowadays, like I'm not going to freak out if Michigan has 3 commitments in the 2026 class as we sit here in March.
Yeah, no, I mean, it started off slow last year before, before I guess the NIL really kicked in, but Michigan has a loaded list this weekend. It's going to be loaded. The number 1 prospect in 2026, Jackson Cantwell, he's going to be on campus among a lot of other guys. It wouldn't shock me if we see a commitment this weekend. Like I don't know that, but it just wouldn't shock me with how many players that Michigan's going to have in Ann Arbor. And then really the rest of the month, we're talking about a lot of guys, and you're going to have more spring visits. You're going to have the spring game, which is going to be loaded too. So I think we're really going to start seeing Michigan recruit at a better pace here in the coming months.
Yeah, and CJ, that's exactly where I'm at. Like, I don't commit right now. And I'm sure the Michigan football staff probably feels differently, but like, don't commit right now. I don't want to hear it. You look on social media and you got these high school kids putting out like their top 15, their top 20, and they're narrowing these lists down. And I don't know, maybe I'm being a bit of a conspiracy theorist here, but I would venture to believe that if you're a recruit, putting that block M on your final list is good for, if nothing else, analytics, right? Because all the Michigan people are going to be like, well, that kid's got Michigan in his top list. We're going to write about it. We're going to cover it. We're going to talk about it. I just don't put too much stock into it, man. Recruiting is very fluid. And even when you commit, and we've seen this all the time, even when you commit, I mean, hello, Bryce Underwood, right? How long was he committed to LSU before he flipped to Michigan in the final hour and became a Wolverine? So a lot can happen between the time you commit and the time that you sign. But overall, I think they did a hell of a job in this 2025 class, and I would expect that to continue moving forward. So staff-wise, we're good. Offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, we're good. Recruiting trail, we're good under Sharon Moore. Let's talk about transfer portal, something that Jim Harbaugh and his staff, that you bring in Olu Oluwatimi, Drake Nugent, you get guys on the offensive line. They supplemented their roster via the transfer portal pretty well during the Harbaugh era. I would venture to say Sharon Moore has continued that and possibly then some. There were some needs that Michigan had that they needed to fill via the transfer portal, and they certainly did it. It starts with Mikey Keene. You had mentioned it earlier in the show. Mikey Keene's a guy who's thrown for over 8,000 yards in his career. He's a guy who's thrown for over 60 touchdown passes in his career. I get that Michigan had some veterans going into the 2024 season. They didn't have a Mikey Keene on their roster. Jack Tuttle had more reps than any of the other options, but he never was able to establish himself like as a starter anyway. Mikey Keene had done that. I mean, he came into the big house week 1 in 2024 and gave the Wolverines some fits. And so certainly a big need at quarterback. I think Sharon Moore looked at that and said, we're not going to do what we did heading into 2024. I'm going to go out and get Bryce Underwood, and then I'm going to go out and get my veteran. But it wasn't just Mikey Keene. There were some other critical pieces he added on the in the transfer portal. Justice Haynes, who figures to be play a big role along with Jordan Marshall, and by all accounts, he looks pretty impressive early. You also have Donovan McCulley. We're going to talk about the wide receivers in a bit, but he's a big body wide receiver. Former quarterback, comes over from Indiana. He's with the Wolverines now. You get Troy Bowles, linebacker from Georgia. You get Trey Williams on the defensive line. You get Damon Payne, Trey Williams from Clemson, Damon Payne on the defensive line from Alabama. It's not easy to replace guys like Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant on the defensive line, but I think Michigan did what they needed to do in the transfer portal to make sure they have bodies. So I'll ask you the same thing that I asked about the recruiting trail. When you look at the pieces that Sharon Moore went out and brought in from the transfer portal, you got to be feeling pretty good about what they were able to do.
Yeah, I mean, he went out and did a great job getting incoming freshmen to come in, and then he went out and filled some voids in the transfer portal. Yeah, losing Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant were massive losses, but you get Ray, and that's a recruiting win, right? You get Rayshon Benny to come back for a 5th year. He could have went somewhere else, probably for more money, possibly. I don't know, but you get him, you retain him. You go out and get 2 former 5-stars and Damon Payne and Trey Williams. Like, you got 3 guys right there that you can rotate in the interior. You go get TJ Guy and Derek Moore to also come back, which were massive gets. So yeah, I mean, Sharon Moore went out and not only retained his roster, but he brought in some veterans. And I know Michigan fans probably wanted more of a splashy get than Mikey Keene, but I think a lot of people, they're underestimating Keene. Like, what you want is a proven passer, and that is what Mikey Keene is. I know that he played for Fresno State, a little bit of a lower level than the Big Ten. He's a smaller guy, but he is a proven passer. He is a guy that can pass the football. And you, at this level, you can't just wait around for somebody to become a proven passer. And that's what Michigan did. They went out and got him. If Bryce Underwood isn't ready to start week 1, you have Mikey Keene. I still think it's going to be kind of a 2 QB system to start off with.
Hold on. We'll get into that, Trent. We'll get into that. Don't give it all away quite yet. Yes, I agree. I mean, if last year taught us anything, you need a guy that can throw the ball. You need a guy who's got experience. Mikey Keene certainly fits that bill. And obviously the relationship that he has with Chip Lindsey. Chip Lindsey was the coordinator at UCF when Mikey Keene was there. So he was familiar with Mikey Keene. And when he came to Michigan, he saw that Mikey Keene was in the transfer portal and he wanted to make sure he could bring him to Ann Arbor because he knows how he's built. Chip Lindsey this week said he's a guy that doesn't flinch. He never gets rattled. He's played a lot of reps, played a lot of football. He's entering his 5th year. And I think when you do bring a guy like Bryce Underwood in the fold, Trent, yeah, I mean, you're not going to go to the transfer portal and get a guy who's looking to start for the next 2 to 3 years. I mean, Bryce Underwood, if he sits for 1 year, is going to be a little bit surprising. There's no way this guy's going to be on the bench for 2 years learning behind somebody. Bryce Underwood is going to be on the field. And so I think Mikey Keene, he understands this is his final year of college football. And according to Chip Lindsey, Mikey Keene wants to go into coaching and wants to do that type of thing. And so I think he looked at the University of Michigan and said, hey, I can be that bridge quarterback. I can be the steady hand. I can be the experienced guy. He doesn't have to be the guy that carries the whole load. I think he's got enough weapons around him, but he can get the ball from point A to point B. And that fact alone is a huge step forward from where this team was last year. So absolutely, I think that was a huge get. And overall, Trent, I agree with you. I think Sherrone Moore saw that there were needs on this roster. Were they big, splashy gets? I don't think so, but I think they're guys that are going to play and make a big impact in 2025, and that's exactly what you need out of the transfer portal. So, again, top to bottom, from his staff to the recruiting trail to the transfer portal, I think Sherrone Moore has done a hell of a job this offseason in setting up Michigan for success in 2025. I saw somebody bring it up in the comments earlier. They're going to try to temper their expectations for Michigan in 2025. They don't want to get too hype, don't want to get too ahead of their skis, but it looks like on the surface, this Michigan football team is set up in a much better position than they were heading into 2024. What that means, on fall Saturdays, we'll have to see how it plays out, but you got to like the pieces they have on the roster and the pieces that they have on the staff. Let's get into some of those needs. I saw it brought up in the comments. Trent, I think you mentioned it earlier in the show. Let's talk about wide receiver a little bit, because for as good as they did on the recruiting trail, for as good as they did in the transfer portal, I mentioned Donovan McCulley, and they also brought in another wide receiver. Wasn't he from
Anthony Simpson from UMass?
UMass, right? Okay, so they get another wide receiver from UMass. But I think that when you land a guy like Bryce Underwood, the hope is that, well, we're going to get some big-time wide receivers right now. We didn't really see that happen on the recruiting trail. Again, you got Andrew Marsh, but not necessarily a big splashy wide receiver recruit. And then in the transfer portal, Michigan didn't make any big waves there either. So are you surprised at what Michigan did or didn't do in terms of wide receiver? And do you think this is an area that they need to address in the spring?
Yeah, I mean, I thought when Bryce Underwood committed, obviously Andrew Marsh, I think he's going to be really good before it's all said and done at Michigan. I think he's going to be a very good starting receiver. But I mean, you thought a guy like Derek Meadows was going to come with Bryce Underwood. You thought that Michigan would go out and land at least one 5-star player, and it didn't happen at wide receiver. They went out and filled a little bit of voids there with getting a 6'5" Donovan McCulley from Indiana, who couldn't break the rotation last year with the Hoosiers, but was their leading receiver 2 years ago under Tom Allen. And then you also go get a slot receiver and Anthony Simpson from UMass, who I think caught for around like 700 or 800 yards last year. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that any of those guys are real splashy. I'm not sold personally on the receiver corps right now. I kind of want to see how they progress through the spring game, see if anybody really steps up. I know they really wanted Skylar Bell from UConn.
that did not end up happening. There's still some rumors that he could re-enter the portal in the spring, and maybe Michigan could be the suitor again for him. I don't know that they have a true number one guy. I think they've got several number twos, number threes. With that being said, though, we really don't know what the receiver corps was like last year when you didn't really have a true quarterback. Like Davis Warren was the best they had, and I mean, let's be honest, he's probably a backup at best. And now you have Mikey Keene and you have Bryce Underwood who can sling the rock at more of an elite pace than what Davis Warren can. So maybe that will open things up for Frederick Moore and Samaj Morgan, Samaj Morgan showed some flashes 2 years ago with JJ McCarthy. So it's possible the receivers can take a step up with a better quarterback. Just on paper, it's a little underwhelming, but I mean, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and before I get into that, Douglas, just to avoid any confusion, I don't think any of us are denying that Andrew Marsh, I mean, he was a high 4-star. I think this guy, and I said it earlier in the show, hearing a lot of good things about him so far early. I think that he can be a tremendous player in this Michigan offense, but he's not, when you talk about like a big splash wide receiver, like a 5-star big body target, and I hate to keep using the comparison, but not a Jeremiah Smith type get, you know what I mean? You're not getting that type of notoriety. Doesn't mean he's not going to be great. Doesn't mean he's not going to be that dude. I think there was just an assumption that, you sign a guy like Bryce Underwood, these elite big time wide receivers are sure to follow. And we haven't seen that quite yet. And Trent, you make a great point, and this was something that I thought about a lot, and something that I thought, what is this?
I do that a lot, Chris. I make a lot of good points.
Are you on the bottle again, Jared? What's going on here? Who else said it? We got Peyton Leary's going to be that. Peyton O'Leary's going to be that dude.
Scott will be in the spring game.
He will. He'll make some plays in the spring game. Scott Ryan says, just say it, the wide receiver group is weak. Look, here's what I'll say about that. Trent, I agree with you. I don't know if the wide receiver group is weak for the reasons that you listed. When you look at the way that this thing looked last season, it's easy to point to the wide receivers and say, they don't have a guy. They don't have a group of guys. But the reality is Michigan did not have an effective quarterback. I don't want to crap on anybody, right? I think Davis Warren was their best option. There's no doubt about it. But I don't know. Am I a dick for saying Davis Warren is not the future for the quarterback of this pro? No,
it's realistic.
It just is what it is, right? And so you struggled to get the ball from point A to point B. Davis Warren ended up getting benched, and then you try Alex Orji, and then you try Jack Tuttle, and nobody's really having any success. And when you add the fact that you don't have a quarterback on top of, did they have an offensive coordinator that was putting the wide receivers in the best position to succeed? Were they calling plays that were getting the wide receivers involved? I would answer no. So you don't have a great quarterback. You don't have an OC who's getting the wide receivers involved. I think the easiest thing to do is say, well, they don't have any receivers. But to me, how can you be an effective wide receiver when you don't have a quarterback and you don't have an OC trying to get you the ball? Samaj Morgan got the ball quite a few times on bubble screens and jet sweeps, and that shit wasn't working. And Michigan just kept trying to do it. I get that Samaj is a little bit undersized, but I certainly think he can be more effective in 2025 than he was in 2024. I feel that same way about Kendrick Bell. I feel that same way about Frederick Moore. Maybe Peyton O'Leary's in there. Maybe Donovan McCulley can be a guy. I think that Michigan has enough weapons at wideout. I think they needed a better offense, and they need a quarterback that can get them the ball. And when you look at how Michigan has been successful as of late, I mean, go back to 2021. Look at a guy like Ronnie Bell. Was Ronnie Bell an elite wide receiver? He was real good at the University of Michigan. Caught a lot of balls, put up a lot of yards. Was he elite? I don't know. I think Michigan fans would say he's elite because you love Ronnie Bell, but generally speaking,
I wouldn't call Ronnie Bell elite. He was
right.
good.
He was good. I mean, Roman Wilson. Was Roman Wilson an elite wide receiver? Again, Michigan fans might think so, but from a 10,000 foot view, I think he was a really, really good wide receiver and did a lot of good things for the University of Michigan. And, Cornelius Johnson being another guy, made some big plays throughout his career, made big plays against Ohio State. Is he an elite wide receiver? I would argue no. I would put him on the same plane as potentially a Donovan McCulley. So overall point, what I'm saying is Michigan has been successful without needing elite wide receivers. Would you like to have that? Absolutely. If there was a Jeremiah Smith available right now, you would do everything you could to get it. But I don't think Michigan absolutely needs that. And I think Chip Lindsey spoke to that this week when he said, he was asked, are you guys looking to fill, the potential spots on the roster during the spring? And his response was something to the effect of, most of the top tier guys already went to the portal and they're already with their respective teams. What's the likelihood you're going to find a game changer in the portal during the spring? I think it's minimal. It doesn't mean Michigan isn't looking. It just means that I think they feel good about what they have. And I know that when I say that, there's some people that get PTSD because they heard Sharon Moore say that he felt good about the quarterback situation going into the season. But I think this is a little bit different, man. I think Andrew Marsh, Frederick Moore, Samaj Morgan, Kendrick Bell, Peyton O'Leary, to an extent. I think they've got guys that can play the wide receiver role at the University of Michigan. I think they have enough weapons there to at least have a balanced attack. I don't think this is going to be Texas Tech in the early 2000s air raid sort of, you got Mikey Keene or Bryce Underwood throwing it 70 times in a game. I don't think we're ever going to see that in Ann Arbor, but I think they've got enough guys where they can be effective through the air. So, I mean, do you think that's a fair assessment, or do you still look at this group and you say, I don't know. I don't think there's enough there. How much of that do you think is based on what we saw from last year that was maybe out of their control?
Yeah, I mean, I really don't know. I think there's definitely potential. I mean, again, I go back to 2 years ago, and Samaj Morgan, he definitely showed some flashes with JJ at quarterback. Frederick Moore, he played well in the first half against Alabama. I'm not going to say a whole lot about Peyton O'Leary because we haven't seen it really in the regular season. Andrew Marsh, I think he's going to challenge, but he's a true freshman. Go back to Donovan McCulley, 6'5". I think he's your playmaker, possibly down the field of the jump ball situation. It worries me though that he couldn't really break the rotation this past season for a good Indiana team. Like, why is that?
Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot of question marks. But again, let's see what happens in the spring. Let's see what Mikey Keene and Bryce Underwood can do for them. Chip Lindsey, like you said earlier, like, was it some of it to do with Kirk Campbell calling plays, not helping them create separation, or was it strictly their wide receivers couldn't create separation? Like, which was it? So we'll see more hopefully during the spring game, and I'm sure we can come to some more conclusions after that. But I mean, it's definitely a questionable area to me.
Yeah, and Scott, that's a fair point. Like, you could see, as Scott says, but you could see our wide receivers had no separation at all. Hopefully Bryce Underwood's playmaking ability will compensate, but Michigan needs to open the checkbook like they did at QB. I agree. Michigan wide receivers struggled to get separation, but I would also say that a good offensive coordinator can scheme guys open. And I just don't know that Michigan was doing that with Kirk Campbell. And so that's why I'm going to reserve judgment on this wide receiver group, because you don't have a quarterback, you don't have an OC that's putting guys in a position to succeed, scheming them open. Trent, you and I talked about that throughout the entire season when it came to the lack of separation. Like, okay, they're not getting separations on dig routes and running down the field. Like, can you scheme them open? Can you get creative enough as an offensive coordinator to get these weapons open? I think that's really where you earn your money as an OC. And I think that's one of the reasons that Chip Lindsey is there, and whatever his name is not Kirk. Keep forgetting Kirk Campbell's name.
I can't remember that name, man.
Out of sight, out of mind, apparently. So I think we're pretty much in the same spot with the wide receiver. It's sort of a wait and see approach, but I don't think they need to go out and get a big name during the spring. B, I don't think one is going to be available, but if it were to come up, I think Michigan would pursue. And I think that's overall where we're going to leave that one. Let's get to the quarterback thing really quick, Trent. I know that you're a degenerate gambler. I think you actually have money on this, if I'm not mistaken. But when it comes to Bryce Underwood, true freshman QB, 5-star guy, franchise guy, $10 million NIL deal guy, versus Mikey Keene, blue-collar guy. He's transferred now to a couple different programs, 8,000 passing yards, 60-plus touchdowns through the air, a ton of experience. How do you see this one playing out between those two quarterbacks? Because it seems like it's a two-man race. I don't think there's any secret there. We're not anticipating a dark horse Davis Warren sort of emerging.
Davis, man, he might step up.
Look, it's a two-man race. It's a two-man race at this point for quarterback. How do you think this one's going to play out?
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying it really since they got Mikey Keene. I think he's your starter game 1, game 2. maybe game 3. You're going to see Bryce Underwood. I think you're going to kind of see a Cade McNamara, JJ McCarthy system that year 1. But once Bryce Underwood is ready and he shows that he has the grasp of the playbook, he can fully read a college defense, he'll become your full-time starting quarterback year 1, I believe, unless Mikey Keene is just lighting it up in Ann Arbor and you can't bench him because he's playing so well. But that's the way I'm looking at it right now is you're going to go with the veteran, the experience, the guy who can read a defense. He's a polished passer. He will start first 2, 3, 4 games. And then once Underwood is fully ready, I think he will become the starting quarterback.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I don't think there's any question we're going to see Bryce Underwood on the field this freshman season, and he's going to be sprinkled throughout. I think it's just a matter of, is he going to do enough to be able to take over that starting job? And, it's not going to be because of his talent. We know talent-wise, he can be a day one starter. It's all the other things that make up being a quarterback, the things that Mikey Keene has the advantage of experience, being able to read a defense, being able to make the right call at the line. Are you a leader on the field? How you command the huddle, like all of those things are going to be important. Chip Lindsey talked about that this week. He said, hey, I don't anticipate naming a starting quarterback in the spring. And according to Lindsey, and look, God bless him because he hasn't been in Ann Arbor for long, but he's already been Michiganized. He's saying that it's a 4-man race. Everybody's going to have equal opportunity. Everybody's going to get, opportunities with the ones. But overall, I think you're right, Trent. I think that probably the safest bet right now, Mikey Keene is going to be Michigan's starting quarterback in the fall. I think he's going to take a majority of the reps. I think Bryce Underwood, similar to what we saw with Cade McNamara, JJ McCarthy during his freshman year, is going to come in. Underwood's going to get opportunities. Michigan's up big, maybe in certain plays where it just makes sense to bring in a guy like Underwood to try to switch things up. But overall, I see Mikey Keene playing that Cade McNamara role for Michigan in 2025. And, when Michigan did it in 2021, it worked out pretty damn good for the Wolverines. Hell of a regular season. You beat Ohio State, you win the Big Ten, you go to the college football playoff. And that to me is how I see this playing out with Mikey Keene and Bryce Underwood. I'll say this. We've never quite seen anything like this in Ann Arbor. We've never seen Michigan go this hard after a quarterback on the recruiting trail. We've never seen a quarterback recruit like this come to the University of Michigan. Let me ask you this. I'll put it a different way. Would you be surprised if week 1, in the big house, you see number 19 trotting out with the first unit and it's the Bryce Underwood era is here. Michigan is rolling with a true freshman QB.
Would it surprise me? No. I mean, he's 6'4", 220 already. Like Chip Lindsey even said he's physically advanced like more than any freshman that he's seen. Like the dude is a physical specimen. He's talented. He was the number 1 overall ranked recruit for a reason. Would it shock me? No, not at all. Like if Bryce Underwood was named the starter next week, would it shock me? No. I'm just kind of being realistic with my expectations that they went out and got Mikey Keene for a reason, and he's experienced too. He's familiar with Chip Lindsey, right? He actually played under Lindsey at UCF for a season. So to me, that's the odds-on favorite to walk out week 1 as the starting quarterback. But I mean, again, I think when Bryce Underwood is ready, whether it's week 1 or week 4 or week 5, he's going to end up being the starter for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I agree. And that was pretty much what Chip Lindsey said. He's like, look, the best guy will play. And I think if that's Bryce Underwood, what's it been? Not since Chad Henne, right? 20 years since Michigan's rolled out a true freshman starter at quarterback. But if there's any guy that can do it, it's
was Tate Forcier. Wasn't he a true freshman?
I don't know. Was he a true freshman?
I'm pretty sure Tate Forcier rolled out there under Rich Rod as a true freshman.
That's a true freshman?
I think.
I don't know about that. I think it was Chad Henne. I think Chad Henne was the last true freshman starter at Michigan. Somebody in the comments will undoubtedly correct us one way or another.
Somebody look that up. I think Tate Forcier was a freshman.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, we'll find out. They'll figure it out in the comments. They'll do the work for us. CJ, I think you make a great point here. He says if Mikey plays well against Oklahoma, that era doesn't count, says Ralph. Yeah, a lot of people are discounting that era, but you can't because Bernard Robinson was a part of that era. You can't discredit that era.
Tate Forcier, he was, Douglas Tate Forcier.
Well, I mean, Douglas just says Tate Forcier. He's not. Dude,
he looked at. I guarantee you, Douglas looked that up for me.
He's not validating what you're saying. And then you got CJ saying Tate was a true baller. Tater tot. Come on now. What are we doing here? CJ says if Mikey plays well against Oklahoma, then it will play out that way. If he has a bad game week 2, then we might see Underwood start a lot sooner. Look, I agree with that. I think that week 2 game on the road, you go to Norman and you play Oklahoma. Is anybody penciling in Oklahoma as a potential national champion in 2025? I don't think so. But that is not Boomer Sooner. That is not an easy place to go out and win a football game on the road in week 2. You're going to have to figure some things out. I do think that's where maybe having the benefit of a veteran like Mikey Keene, who's got all the reps, he's got the experience, won't feel overwhelmed by that environment. Not saying that Bryce Underwood necessarily would. I'm just saying that I think that that's a luxury to have that going into a game like that so early in the season. And CJ, I think you're right. I think if Mikey Keene struggles in that game, even in the first quarter, second quarter, if they're not moving the ball and Mikey Keene is struggling, I think number 19 is going to come out and they're going to try to find some juice there. And that week 2 game on the road against Oklahoma will probably be a pivotal game in this quarterback battle. I think that I agree with you 100%, CJ. However that game plays out, whichever quarterback plays well in that game, probably going to be your starter for the remainder of the way, depending on injuries and things that are unforeseeable. But if Mikey Keene plays well in that week 2 game, I think he's going to be the starter the remainder of the year.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely could see that too. If Mike, because he's experienced, but at the same time, I still think no matter what, you're going to see plenty of Bryce Underwood. Like, say Mikey Keene is just lighting it up and he's your starter going into Ohio State. I think Bryce Underwood's going to play a ton.
There you go. Here's your bowling buddy. Once again,
several people say Tate was.
Yeah, no, they didn't say he was. They were just screaming Tate. That's all. There was no like confirmation of what you said. Yeah, Troy Underwood might be the guy. We all think. I mean, we know he's the guy. It's just a matter of when is he going to be the guy. And I agree with CJ. I think it's going to be decided there in that week 2 game on the road against Oklahoma. All right, let's finish up the show, man. We're an hour and 16 minutes here. We've got one more thing to discuss. There's a lot of time between now and then, but I want to get your pulse on this, Trent. I want to get where you stand. Or I know you're look up the Tate Forcier thing. Tell me,
dude. He started in 2009. That was his true freshman year.
I don't buy it. I think your data is incorrect over there. I'm going to have to do some research once we get off the show.
Scott clearly doesn't know how to use Google. That's all I'm going to say.
I believe Chad Henne was the last true freshman starter for the University of Michigan. But in any event, let's look ahead a little bit to the 2025 season for the Michigan Wolverines. You know, based on everything that we talked about, man, how last year went, what Sherrone Moore did on the staff, what they did on the recruiting trail, what they did in the transfer portal, how things are setting up right now. As it sits here in March, which again, we're a long ways away from fall. What is your outlook for this football team in 2025? And I guess I'll add to that. What is your definition of success for Sherrone Moore in year 2? What do you need to see happen?
Well, I mean, man, with a 12-team playoff, I personally feel like Michigan should be in that every year. I mean, I think we, like I said earlier, we had too high of expectations for this past season with so many guys leaving the team and coaches leaving the team. But I mean, you have all your coaching staff back for this season. They have one of the best recruiting cycles in all of Michigan history, probably. And you have veterans coming back. You have Rod Moore coming back. Like, I feel like with the schedule too, like we haven't even talked about the schedule, but very favorable for Michigan. I feel like 10 wins should be attainable for this team. And if you win 10 games, you're probably making the playoff. So for me, I think that should be the expectations. At minimum 10 wins, get into the playoff.
Yeah, and I would venture to say that most of the Michigan fan base is going to agree with you. And you know, at the start of the football segment, when we were talking about Sherrone Moore, year 1, 8-5, crazy that you could view an 8-5 as a success. Yeah, you can view that as a success in year 1. But if Michigan goes out and puts together another 8-5 effort in year 2, now people are going to be unsatisfied with it. I think no, we're not. I don't even see the comment. Jesus,
interesting.
You can't use Chat GT or GPT to like get your information, Scott. We got to go to legitimate sources here. I 100% think it's playoff or bust. I would like to see Michigan be in the Big Ten championship game again. I would like to see Michigan beat Ohio State again for a 5th consecutive time, which, by the way, how crazy is it that Ohio State is going to come to Ann Arbor on November 29th, and Ryan Day and the Buckeyes are going to be staring at the very realistic possibility of losing their 5th straight, and nobody from Columbus is even going to give a shit. Do you remember what the conversation was like going into that game last year? You and I talking about, like, if Michigan goes down there and they win with this team, there's going to, all hell's going to break loose in Columbus. And it did for a while. And then all of a sudden they get into the playoff, they make a run, they win a natty, and nobody cares about it anymore. It's just insane to me that that's where we're at in college football. That's where we're at in this rivalry. But in any event, yeah, I want to see Michigan win that game. I want to see Michigan win a conference championship. But ultimately, I think the definition of success for Michigan in 2025, based on everything we talked about with the staff, the roster, the recruiting trail, the transfer portal, this team has to find a way into the college football playoff. The Michigan Wolverines have got to be in the college football playoff. And I think anything short of that, even if it includes a win over Ohio State again, people are going to look around and say, okay, that's cool, but we need to be in the CFP. We need to be competing for national championships. And so I think that's really going to be the barometer of how successful the season is. It really begins and ends there. Are you a playoff team? If you are, it's successful for Michigan. If you're not, then you got to go back to the drawing board. And I would be very surprised, even with the way the roster looks right now, with a lot of the unknowns. You take a look around the Big Ten, I get it. Ohio State is in reload mode, but they are losing significant pieces on their roster as well. Trying to figure out who's going to, you got to find a new starting quarterback. You get Jeremiah Smith back. I get that. You're losing key pieces on the defensive end. Jack Sawyer's gone. I mean, there are some big time contributors who are no longer there, but Penn State, they're getting back Drew Aller. They've got some key contributors that are back as well. Oregon is going to be solid once again, but you get outside of Michigan, Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, I'm looking around at the Big Ten and I don't see any real threat. There's no, I don't view Indiana the same way as I viewed them last year. I don't think Illinois is going to be as strong as they were last year.
Illinois should be better than what they were last year.
No.
Yeah.
Well, Brett Bielema is a joke. That program is a joke. Kirk Cignetti is a joke. I think Illinois and Indiana are going to be in for a rude awakening this year. It's not going to happen. Not in this Big Ten. Now, I could see USC potentially taking a step forward. Are they going to be as bad as they were last year? What did they finish at? 7 wins? 8 wins? Where was USC?
They were terrible. Yeah. I think 7 wins.
Yeah, you got Lincoln Riley out there potentially on the hot seat. I mean, you talk about another coach who was like
USC, a team that was so bad last year, could be better than an Illinois team that returns essentially everybody, including their starting quarterback.
I think Illinois played far above who they typically are. I think they had the luxury of playing a Michigan team that was not so great. And I think Illinois took advantage of the best possible season they could get out of that year. But I think Illinois is going to come back down to earth. I think Indiana is going to come back down to earth. That's just the way I see it. Now, it maybe is that, some bias toward history and just always knowing that Indiana is terrible at football, always knowing that Illinois is terrible at football. Sure, that might be playing a role into that. Northwestern as well, which, by the way, Michigan gets to go out to Chicago and play at Wrigley Field against the Northwestern Wildcats. That's going to be an incredible setting for a football game. But overall, no, man, I don't. Outside of those teams that I mentioned, I mean, you tell me, Trent, the real threat outside of Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State, what's the big threat for Michigan in terms of a playoff race?
I mean, really in the Big Ten, you've got Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Illinois is a dark horse. Outside of them, I mean, nothing screams at you. Like Wisconsin, they haven't been anything. USC has not been anything. Washington still rebuilding from their national championship run. I mean, there's not a whole lot like that's obvious other than Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that to me, Michigan needs to be squarely in the playoff hunt because they are even entering the season with all the unknowns. I think a lot of people are going to view this team as one of the best teams in the conference. And I think they're going to play up to it, man. And really what it comes down to is, can the Wolverines become a playoff team again for Sharon Moore in year 2? Anything short of that, I think people are going to be pissed off. They're not going to be happy about it. I don't see it happening. This is the playoff team. Bryce Underwood for Heisman. We're going to go down that whole road again. How long do you think it's going to be before we're doing the Bryce Underwood for Heisman talk here?
After week 1, when there was like a 75-yard pass for a touchdown.
Oh, that's going to happen for sure. Just under an hour and a half for our first show back after a 4-month hiatus. It was good to be back. Got a few kinks we got to work out, but hey, man, we'll get the training wheels off for the next show next week. We will see you back at Wednesday at noon. Until then, I appreciate y'all for jumping in. We'll talk to you soon.